Okay, good afternoon. A very warm welcome to everybody. My name is Swaran Ravindra. I'm going to be one of your moderators. And with me, I have Ms. Gunela Astbrink. Okay, so Gunela is the chair of Internet Society's Accessibility Standing Group. And I'm also very privileged to be part of her leadership with the Accessibility Standing Group. I work as an academic at Fiji National University, and I've also been a mentor for APrIGF, so we really, indeed, we are quite privileged to be here, to be talking to our esteemed panelists today. Okay, now, just before I go on to our topics, I would like to request Gunela if she could very quickly introduce our esteemed panelists today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gunela Astbrink, chair of the Internet Society Accessibility Standing Group. And I'm delighted we've got this opportunity to present this important topic today about the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the ICT job sector, because it's something that there's a great need, and we will explore in this session about how we can make changes, how we can have more persons with disability become active as employees in the job sector, and it's a challenge. So I am delighted with the speakers we have, and we have on the list here in front Sylvia Cadena, who is the APNIC Foundation manager. And Sylvia's been working with the APNIC Foundation for many years, and also the ICF Foundation in working on expanding the opportunities in network operations, etc., in the region. Then we're very pleased to have Philip Smith, who is the chair of APRICOT, and that's on operational technologies, the Asia Pacific Regional Internet Conference on operational technologies. So APRICOT is technology oriented and not farming oriented. And also Philip is PFS Internet Development. And then Georgina Naigulevu, and she can't be with us in person, but is participating remotely. And she has a company called Tetra Tech on digital and health information, and she is based in Fiji. Manique Gunaratne is managing a disability training and resource center at the Employers Federation of Ceylon. And so we're very much looking forward to the expertise of a panel, and this is going to be a very interactive panel, and that's what we're looking forward to, sharing ideas and how we can move forward to make a difference for employment for persons with disability.
Thank you, Gunela. So as Gunela has already mentioned, this is going to be an interactive session. We want you to speak to us. We want us to engage in some meaningful conversation. So please feel free to raise your voice on any issue that you would like to, pertaining to the topic, of course. We do not have any PowerPoints today, so that's perhaps good news. We don't want any death by PowerPoint. So we are sticking to some just meaningful conversation, okay? So let me tell you a little bit about initially our proposal. So session 4, inclusion of persons with disabilities in the ICT job sector. So with more people actively participating in the digital economy, it is vital to acknowledge the fact that persons with disabilities still face a number of disparities in the digital spaces which greatly inhibit their ability to practice their digital rights. A people-centric internet is where people from all parts of the community, including persons with disabilities, can be actively engaged. This means not only safely using an accessible internet, but also successfully being employed in the sector. This session focuses on how we as a community can work together to create an accessible environment to train and employ more tech people with disability. So all in all, in a nutshell, what we're trying to say here as a community, that being in the ICT sector, being in the education landscape as well, we see that there's a huge disparity between the tech jobs available, even the gaps in the tech jobs, right, the tech job sector, and the population density of persons with disabilities. So we're here today to just get engaged in some meaningful dialogue, which will perhaps be able to yield some solutions together. So a very warm welcome to everybody who has joined us online. Hi, Gina, it's good to see you. Okay, all right. So without further ado, let's go to our first topic of discussion. What are some of the gaps between the current ICT job market versus the population density of persons with disabilities? Secondly, how do we think this can be improved?
Yes, the gaps, because in the ICT sector, when it's come to employment, there are very big gaps. One, the main reason is people with disabilities in most of the countries, they come from the very grassroots level. So their education level is low because they don't have facilities for education. And thereafter, when due to lack of education, no vocational training, and therefore employment is very low. So why these IT related jobs, and there is a gap because the devices that persons with disabilities use are of high cost. So most of the people with disabilities cannot afford these devices, especially in IT related devices, because for example, for a vision impaired person, so for a sighted person, all of you can get a piece of paper and pen and write something wherever you are, you can do it. But for a vision impaired person, he or she cannot do that. Either it has to be in braille or in technology, either a smartphone or a laptop. So these devices, the screen reader softwares and other devices, not only for vision impaired persons, the hearing impaired persons, persons with low vision, and also persons who have other difficulties in finger movements as well, who cannot type. Those, the software and the assistive devices are of high cost. And also, in most of the developing countries, the education is not targeted on devices and on technology. So therefore, when people with disabilities are not trained in technology, then when they go for employment, it's very difficult for them, and it's very difficult to find employment. And on the other hand, employers are also not sensitized what sort of job a person with a disability can do, and people with disabilities have to develop their skills according to the job role. Because in companies, there are specific job roles that you have to play, though the skills of persons with disabilities should match. Proper job match is very important. So the companies, the awareness among companies is very important, because sometimes they think, the employers think that it's a very high cost to recruit a person with a disabilities. No, it is not. Most of these people with disabilities, especially vision impaired persons, they already have their screen reader software. The employers, what they should do is the platforms and all those platforms and the systems they have, they should make accessible for people with disabilities. It's a working environment that should be accessible. Especially, there should be an inclusive inclusive workplace. When the workplace is inclusive, people with disabilities will not have any difficulty in finding employment and doing the job role without any difficulty. But there should be proper devices, software, and it should be accessible. If the company system or the computer system is not accessible, a person with a disability, especially a vision impaired persons, cannot access the system or do the work role. So it's persons with disabilities have to develop their skills, and on the other hand, employers should be sensitized to provide employment opportunities and to make all these platforms and systems accessible for people with disabilities.
Thank you, Manique. I can see Gina smiling away, because I remember we having this form of conversation so many times, Gina. about the fact that there is certainly a huge disparity between the technical jobs in the market and our persons with disabilities who are not actually able to, get hold of those jobs. So we have definitely spoken about this many times, even in the Pacific Front. Philip, would you like to say something?
I think your initial comment about, there being a gap between the two sides, I don't even see it as a gap. It's a massive chasm. And if I think through my 25, 30 years of working in this now, I'm trying to think through the opportunities for people with whatever disability they've had. I can barely think of anybody in my career that I've met. And I think Manique pointed out as well, anybody with a disability, whatever it is, has to prove themselves 100% better than any other able-bodied candidate. Employers will look at the person as a whole, not the skill set they're actually hiring for. And we've got to get over that. Right. Hire people for their ability, what the skill set that you're hiring for, not just look at the perfect picture that you have in your mind's eye. And that will go a long way to try and make things better. And this is talking from, I suppose, developing country perspective. It's a lot worse where the funding and support isn't available, as Manique has pointed out.
Okay, I actually agree with you because there's certainly this underlying hidden biases that is not so visible. So that certainly there's a lot of biases. When I've actually been part of some panels where we do recruitment, and you can see it happening as one of the panelists sitting on the other side of the table. But then, of course, there's lots of governance issues there, to which we can talk about shortly. Sylvia, would you like to elaborate?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to just make a comment about to be able to identify whatever gap is between the able. Is that the correct way of saying it, right? The able-bodied people and people with disabilities in the internet technology or the technology sector. We first need to know what is the gap in general for what that workforce is. And one of the biggest issues that we have at the moment, for example, to be able to see if the efforts from APNIC or the Foundation on Capacity Building are actually making any sense or any dent in the needs of the community, is that all the inventories around how many network engineers exist to be able to maintain and operate the infrastructure in the Asia Pacific, those doesn't exist. There is no inventory that tells us how many network engineers exist or are required to maintain the networks, because network engineering is all combined as part of the STEM careers. So we get that with all the other engineering. So civil engineering, etc., is all in one big bucket on how they identify who's studying for engineering, and there is no characterization to know if this person is a computer scientist engineering that is going to work on maintaining internet infrastructure, for example. So we don't even know. We know from the UN how many doctors are out there, how many nurses are out there to be able to, how many nurses you need to cope with a particular population. We don't know how many engineers we need in every country in the region to be able to know if we are solving the needs of that particular economy. So to start to define what gap there is, the biggest chance is we don't know the size of the networks and what is the need of network engineers to maintain those networks, let alone if they are women or men, if there are members of the LGBTQI technical community, if they have disabilities, what is special or different about them, and how can we better support them. So one of the biggest challenges we have to be able to address that issue is that technology has been kind of taking a little bit of a stab at that, incorporating a lot of automatization and network management remotely. So some economies where there is no local technical capacity to operate a particular network, they can hire some software automatization from New Zealand, and then they run the network remotely, right? So the technology sometimes limited the extent to what you can know what the local capacity actually is to be able to maintain mobile networks, networks in a hospital, the network of a university. So I would kind of go back to the question about how are we going to find that gap? How are we going to know, are we going to do something to know how many network engineers are needed in the Asia Pacific to cope with the needs of the internet that grows in the Asia Pacific, to find out how many of those could be from the community for people with disabilities. We don't have that information, and I think that makes it very difficult for APNIC, for the foundation, for any training exercises that APRICOT or other providers and organizations do, to actually know if what you're doing is a drop in the ocean or is the big bucket, because you don't know how big the need is. I hope that doesn't derail the conversation.
No, that's absolutely fine.
I don't think we have that information.
I think that's a very valid point, because I can give you one perspective from the Asia Pacific region. So personally, I work for Fiji National University's National Training and Productivity Center, which is the national productivity organization that is mandated to do skills needs assessment in the country. So we have to give these reports where we basically tell the APO region that we have these many mechanics in the country, and this is the skills gap. This is what the market currently lacks. But we are perhaps not doing the same thing in terms of inclusion. So thank you very much for so boldly highlighting that. I feel this is something that most countries perhaps have been ignoring for a very long time. And I'll definitely bring it up with APO as well. Maybe we need to have another perspective on inclusion. We certainly are doing a lot in terms of skills gaps assessment, trade jobs, network engineers, but then of course infrastructural needs is a very important perspective of this conversation. Thank you, Sylvia. Let's move on to the next part, which is perhaps something that Philip would like to start deliberating on. How can the technical community help to address these gaps?
Well, I don't want to say, oh, the technical community's been doing lots of things, but, if I share with everybody what APRICOT's been running for many, many years, we run a fellowship program to try and encourage, assist, and, put it bluntly, disadvantaged folks from less fortunate parts of the region to come to the event, take part in the event, whether it's technical workshops or come to the actual conference week. So, our workshops are training, the hands-on training, 5 days worth. And we've run that for, I don't know how many years, 10, 12, 15 years probably, to try and get people to come. But of course, the problem is, people have to know that we're actually doing this, and the challenge is always reaching out to everybody. And I don't know whether there's a view of a lot of people that, it's too hard to apply because 500 people apply for it and only 25 seats and so on. And, what are all the criteria? Because, we do look for candidates who would be the most effective for not only just whoever they're working for, but for the local community as well. And so that program is certainly there. I'm not saying it's going to solve the problems that we're discussing here, but we've tried over the years to focus it more on women, so more women take part in this, because we have the age-old problem. It's lots of men turn up, we're counting women in 1 or 2 hands, if we're lucky. And, I think we could end up going down the rat hole of talking about quota systems and all the rest. And, we did try and do that a little bit, and then the problem is reaching out so that enough people are aware that they can apply and that they actually have a chance, because the review committee is looking for people who can be most effective. And there are a lot of talented people out there who say, oh, well, if I'd known, I would have come along. So taking that program, we're only limited by the funding that we have from the sponsors of the training or the fellowship program. So the more funding we have, the more people we can get to come along to it. So that's APRICOT's perspective. But the network operator groups and the technical community have started following that model as well. So some of the country NOGs and the region NOGs are now doing the same thing, small fellowship programs, again, to try and get people from the rural parts That's one model, but that model can be used for every other less advantaged part. I don't want to say disadvantaged, but less advantaged. Those in the big cities always seem to get everything, whereas those in the rural, they've got just as big, if not more, challenges. So we've been trying to focus to try and bring internet connectivity and ability for as many as possible without everybody in the big cities always getting everything. So that is certainly there, but I'm all ears about how we can improve what we can do to give more opportunity for those with disabilities, especially.
Thank you, Philip. Let's just cut across to Gina. Gina, if you just heard what Philip said, I think it takes me back to one of the times when we were talking about fellowship programs, and there was a time when we were, systematically fighting with the main key stakeholders. Hey, we're in the Pacific, we have persons with disabilities. There's 1.2 million people in the South Pacific Islands that have disabilities. And of course, as you mentioned about the gaps that we do not, right now we're not even cognizant of what the gaps are, right? So, Gina, if you could tell us a little bit about your experience, asking you a question straight out. Was it very difficult to get into that scholarship program, the fellowship program, sorry?
Well, yes, the APRICOT, I attended that fellowship and had the opportunity. The questions were quite unique because it really looked at the engineering side of things. But I guess it's also been brave enough to apply for APRICOT and trying to sit through a hackathon, and you're coming from a software development background, and then you're sitting there with a room full of guys who are actually from a networking perspective. It was a really enjoyable event. It inspired the Pacific Hackathon concept note that I had done up. But I think this is something where the awareness and it going down to persons with disability who are in the ICT sector that would be interested in doing networking and understanding the IP addresses and how these devices work. Currently, I'm working in the digital health space, and this knowledge that we gained from the APRICOT was really instrumental in the current work that I do, because I needed to understand how the modalities talk to on different networks. But it's certainly something that the technical community provides as fellowship opportunities for persons with disability to grow into those spaces. I guess, thank you for asking me that question. And I know that a lot of the speakers have spoken about employment. I'm also keen to understand how we could become employers as persons with disability. That would be a challenge as well, and the type of business model that we would have to work in to create a digital entrepreneurship. So apart from those, there must be different opportunities as well to encourage persons with disability to become digital entrepreneurs, and then perhaps they can go into the accessibility website and learn how to teach others as well on making his website ear-friendly for a person that's reading the website. So I hope that answers the question, but throwing it back to you, Swaran.
Thank you, Gina. Yes, certainly. I have had some students in the past who have various types of disabilities. They have graduated with a TAFE diploma in network engineering. Some of them still don't have jobs. And these were students who aced the units. I've had a student who had close to severe level of cerebral palsy. And you wouldn't believe he's a fantastic graphic designer. I mean, you can imagine the physical challenges he may have had to overcome to be able to hold a mouse properly and be able to create designs, organic designs. And I'm talking about something that, I mean, of course, in Fiji, we know that we are limited in technology in some areas, of course. There's socio-economical issues as well. So you can only imagine the challenges that he may have had to overcome, but he still doesn't have a job. And talking about entrepreneurship, He also tried to go into his, start off his own business, but people just do not take him seriously. And that is really a shame. Thank you, Gina.
Can I just interrupt here and say, for those people who are participating remotely, we look forward to your comments and questions. So we are including everyone here. And so I'll be monitoring this as we go along. And I just also wanted to note that there are in some countries support programs. For example, in Australia, there's something called Australian Network on Disability, AND, that is there to educate employers in whatever field it might be, but there happens to be a number of technology companies who are members and get resources and get support to understand what's involved with employing persons with disability. And I believe there are those sort of organisations in other countries as well. And, we've got the Employers Federation of Ceylon here. So it's a matter of moving that chasm to become closer together somehow, isn't it, Swaran?
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the next topic of discussion. So a number of us come from the field of academia and of course training, vocational training as well. So question to the panel. How can training organizations become more inclusive of persons with disability? Manique, would you like to take that question?
Yes. Especially trainings are very important for people with disabilities because the school curriculum and the university, they will just have academic qualifications when they pass out. But they need to have the professional qualifications plus to work equally capable as a person with a non-disability in an organization. For example, for a vision impaired person, if he or she doesn't have the IT skills, he or she cannot work in an organization equally capable as a sighted person. So that's how we bridge the gap. So IT skills, maybe him or she must be having other qualifications, but the IT skills are important to prepare your own documents and communicate with emails, because in organizations there will be nobody to give in Braille or any other formats. So the IT skills are very important. That's why a long time ago from our organization and our training center, we thought about it and started especially the Specialized Training and Disability Resource Center, where we we conduct 24 courses for people with disabilities, which includes Cisco Information Technology Essentials, ITE, and Cisco CCNA, and also other various courses to develop the employability skills of people with disabilities. Because we are developing job seeking skills and job keeping skills. Both are equally important. Retaining in jobs are important, and also the skills are required because I'm working at the Employers Federation of Ceylon, where we have about 700 plus member companies in our membership, and we have formed the Employers Network on Disability to promote employment opportunities for people with disabilities. So on the one hand, we are developing the skills of people with disabilities. Especially we have realized that the IT skills, soft skills, and the language skills are lacking in people with disabilities in the very grassroots level. Because when it's come to IT related jobs, definitely you have to have the knowledge of English. Most of these people with disabilities come from the very grassroots level and they study in local languages, so the level of English is low. That's why sometimes we find it difficult to place them in IT related jobs and office type executive jobs. So developing the skills is also important, and how to look for employment, who are the employers that they should contact. And also we have a database for people with disabilities with the CVs, and when the companies request, we do the proper job match. Because for the employer, it's important that they get the right candidate, and on the other hand, persons with disabilities also should get the proper job, otherwise both parties will be frustrated and therefore the people with disabilities will not retain in job. And for employers, we are doing a lot of sensitizing programs such as the proper job match, and also making awareness on how to make an inclusive employment. Training on disability ethics, accessibility. We do disability accessibility audits for physical environment and web accessibility audits and give them recommendation, and also how to provide reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities in working environment. Sometimes it's not a big cost for an employer to provide a reasonable accommodation. For a vision impaired person, just to provide a screen reading software to the computer will do. And also for a low vision person, just a extra table lamp will do a world of good for them. So if it is a wheelchair user, of course, you must have accessible washroom. And also, if it is a hearing impaired person, just train 2 staff members on sign language, because companies spend a lot of money on staff trainings, on various trainings, various skills. Why not train them to at least 2 persons is more than enough in sign language, so that hearing impaired persons also cannot be included in the workforce. So it is, the training is very important, and also we have done the e-learning facilities, online trainings, because even 3-4 years before the COVID-19 pandemic came, we never thought of this sort of pandemic will come, but we have trained university students, job seekers, and also people who are already employed on how to work online on various softwares and assistive devices. So then it was easy for them to get adjusted to the new system, especially the university students, because all the lectures were online, and the companies with the working home concept came. So all these trainings were useful for people with disabilities, because we thought about these things long time ago, not because of the pandemic, because people with disabilities face difficulties. They have transportation difficulties, no accommodation to come to Colombo or in urban areas, because they are from the very grassroots level, and there's nobody, support services are not available. So therefore we tried to promote online services, especially on softwares and assistive devices. But on the other hand, I must say that people with disabilities face difficulties in getting these assistive devices, because they are very high. And also when it comes to training, most of the vocational trainings, the training programs that they conduct are outdated. They don't suit the job market. That's the difference, that the trainings that we have. We cater to the job market and train people with disabilities to develop their skills according to the job market. So especially government training centers and other training centers should be upgraded to have courses to suit the job market. And also the people with disabilities must change their attitudes and not go into traditional jobs, seek for new employment, think in a different way. Because to give you a slight example, I'm not a person who was born blind. I became vision impaired in my late 20s, in my very young age. At that I was in the sighted society, then I became vision impaired. Then I thought to myself what I should do, how I can be employed again and integrated into the society. That's why I came to the IT field. Because that's the only way a person with a disability, especially a vision impaired person, can work equally capable as sighted people like all of you. Right? That's how I developed my skills and made me what I am today. The computer, the screen reader software, and everything. So it's very important that they realize, think in a different way. And also when it's come to training, I would have been just learn all these things and develop my skills. But it's not me. I thought of we. So that's why we started the training center and started training other people with disabilities, because it's very important for them also to come up in life, to independent, because we should be able to be independent so that the people with disabilities can be economically stable and also professionally qualified.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of learning from what Manique has outlined, a lot. We have a question, a remote question from Jolie McPhee. The question is, I am told blind people can make excellent captioners, perhaps because they have exceptional oral comprehension. Are there other ICT jobs that persons with disability actually excel at? That's the question. Possibly Gina might be able to answer that, and or Manique, I'll leave it to you both to answer that one. Thank you.
If I may, I do know that persons with disability, especially the psychosocial disability for those with autism, they're really good with spatial data. I was born with limited mobility, so I intensely love software development, but recently moving more into the digital health space. I also have come across others as well with spinal injury that have very good graphic artists. But yes, that's some of the examples, but I'm sure that there are more. I'll hand it over to you, Manique, as you may have a lot more.
Yes, adding on to her, actually for people with disabilities, it's the environment, the barriers created by the environment that makes them unable to perform a specific task. Right? I'll give you a simple example. Now, if this program, say you are organized in the 10th floor or 11th floor, if I switch off the lift, none of you all will bother to come walk the stairs. Then all of you all could be people with physical disabilities. And if we switch off all the lights here, all of you will be vision impaired, only I will be talking. Right? And if I speak here without the mic, only through lip reading, you all will not understand anything, and all of you all will be hearing impaired person. Then what is disability? Disabilities are barriers created by the environment. If these barriers are removed, I think people with disabilities can do any sort of job. When it comes to especially IT related job, why a vision impaired person or hearing impaired person can't perform that specific IT related job is those platforms, websites, or the systems are not created to suit people with disabilities. They are not according to the WCA 3 standards. If all these websites and platforms are created into access web guidelines, then all of us can perform any task. How many of you all came to this today in the morning in a wheelchair? Just tell me. Yes or no? No. Nobody came, no? Right. Now you all say no. If you all see a person on a wheelchair with 2 wheels, you will say, oh, he is a wheelchair user. But all of you all came in a chair, a nice comfortable chair, which ran on 4 wheels, right? If it is a car, 4 wheel, bus or a 4 wheel, train, so many wheels, those are also wheelchairs, right? Nice comfortable chairs which ran on wheels. Huh? So what is disability? The barriers created by the environment. So if all of you all who are without disabilities, if you create a barrier-free environment, and especially IT related, I am begging you, if whatever you all make, the web, maybe the website, the platforms, or any other thing, software, all these softwares, please make them accessible. We also have the right to access all what you see. I cannot see any, all of you all can see me, but I cannot see any of you all. When we go to online, when we go to internet, there are so many graphics, animations, which our screen readers are not reading. At least label them that saying that there's a graphic and what that picture description is. Like you see from your eyes, we have to hear from our screen reader and do the same task. Thank you.
Thank you, Manique. We couldn't have said it in a better way. Even something very simple as captioning a picture on a regular Microsoft Word document. And the system is telling you, would you like to caption this picture? And we completely, blatantly ignore it. Thank you for highlighting that, Manique. Let's talk a little bit about inclusive legislations. So what role do you think that legislation has in increasing training and employment prospects? And what are your thoughts on job quotas for persons with disabilities? Now, I could give you one example of the Pacific perspective. So in 2018, the National Employment Policy specifically stated that 2% of the workforce of any organization in Fiji needs to be reserved for persons with disabilities. But realistically speaking, I think Gina and anyone here or online who is from the Pacific would perhaps know that this is far from reality. Gina is a professional programmer, someone who lives with disability, and she's a fine programmer. She is also very instrumental in digitalization of medical records in Fiji at the moment, which is something that we have been struggling for the past 7 years, and finally the suggestions have been taken on board. So very proud to be working with her on that. So Gina, if you could please comment on the fact that though we have legislation, but we don't see our people with disabilities in the workforce. Where are the 2%?
Well, just to touch briefly on that historic legislation that was done in 2018, prior to that, in the census for 2017, we had the statistics of 13.7% of our populations are persons with disability. That was done from our national census data. But that legislation, though it marked the establishment of the rights of a National Council for Persons with Disability and setting out rights to include that work in employment for the 2%, it's the monitoring and evaluating and learning on the stats that we try to take from that, from the Fiji Disability Federation that I am with as a board member. One of the struggles is also to make sure that we are profiling and creating a database to help us monitor that. To monitor this legislation and its impact to our community. One of the key things I think as well is around whether we are doing enough in encouraging and increasing those numbers. Are we learning from the data that we have collected to push and include and advocate for more training and making sure that everyone has that accessibility to employment? Personally, one thing that I've seen in our country that has changed since this legislation was shared was that a lot of employers started advertising a lot more in the papers on equality and including persons with disability. But how many of those ads actually eventuate into the statistics of that 2% is something that we don't have much visibility on. And I think that's something that we need to challenge and try and capture that data so that we're able to measure that impact of that legislation. But certainly in terms of small changes, they're happening for our country. But I hope that helps you and answers the question.
Thank you, Gina. Okay, so let's have some questions now. Is there a question from the audience?
I have a question to any of the panelists or all of the panelists. Is there in your country any legislation which forbids discrimination against employing people on grounds of so-called disability? Have you got legislation that actively defends people against discrimination?
In Sri Lanka, we have the government gazette notification 88 of saying that 3% of government reservations should be for people with disabilities. But it doesn't say anything about the private sector. But since I am working at the Employers Federation of Ceylon, we have a huge membership. We promote employment opportunities for people with disabilities. But in the government sector, if it is discriminated or when it's come to implementation, there are gaps. But what we do is, if there is a discrimination or the employment opportunity is not given, so we can always quote that the gazette notification and find some solutions. And there are cases we were able to gain employment through that process. And also these days we are drafting the disability rights bill as well. So we have included several articles on that. So maybe when we are able to pass that in Parliament, it will be a better place. But anyway, when it's come to implementation, there are gaps.
We have our People and Productivity Director at the back that I was just texting before the session. If Luis could answer the framework in Australia about what Australia is doing for people with disabilities. I have absolutely ignorance on that subject, so better for Luis.
Sure. Craig's probably better positioned to answer the legalities of this, but obviously we're very lucky, I guess, that we do live in a country where, you know, we have protections in place for any form of discrimination, so that would include disability. What happens though in reality obviously is not always the same as what's legislated. So it really is up to each of us to make sure that that's enacted the way it should be.
Thank you, Luis. And on that note, well, we have also our legal counsel here that can add to the conversation. See.
Hello, it's Craig Ng, APNIC General Counsel. I'm wearing a different hat in here because I have a huge passion for the disability sector, and as people that know me know that I volunteer in that space. To me, legislation and mandatory requirement doesn't work as effectively as enabling legislation. So in Australia, for example, all buildings have to be disability friendly. So you can't have a building without with steps that people can't access. You need to have ramps and things like that. So that creates a situation where offices are accessible by people with disability. But more to the point, I think, rather than talking about quota, it's the mindset of employers, and that's where I come from. I think employers that embraces inclusivity and diversity, and I'm very proud to say that APNIC and APNIC Foundation fully embrace that concept. And when you have that concept, then you look at the ability of the people, not focus on the disability of the people. You look at the skills that they can perform, and not the disability that they might have that might not affect the work that they can do. So I feel strongly that it's about the mindset of the employers that we need to change, and no amount of legislation and quota would get you there if they are not minded that way. Thank you.
And on that note, I want to wrap up the collective APNIC and APNIC Foundation contribution by saying that the one thing that I do believe that legislation could really make a big push is on encouraging in a very strong way that organizations put their content and their services accessible online and use standards to publish information online. And that all of these platforms that we are getting licenses for to create that working environment in the IT sector actually integrate in an accessible manner. One of the biggest challenges that the people with disabilities have to probably work at an organization like APNIC or the foundation is that we are a multi-platform organization, and platforms do not integrate with accessibility in mind. So it could be that a website is accessible, but then Slack on the website is not. So is that part of the integration between platforms and how standards are enforced, where probably the legislation could be making a big push? Because as Manique mentioned, the disabilities are the barriers in the environment. And if the environment where you're supposed to work is just the platforms, and those platforms don't let you do your work, then that's where the problem is. And that is something that in the UK, for example, has been adopted very heavily on what websites and platforms and systems have to be fully accessible, not only for the visually impaired, but for people with more than one disability. And that's very, very hard to do. It's very easy to say that something is accessible, not necessarily easy to implement. And then the other bit is that there are very limited capacity locally in the Asia Pacific to do accessibility audits of websites and services locally because of the language characters and linguistic difficulties. The technologies that are implemented to do the accessibility audits are in English. So it doesn't apply for websites developed in characters that are read the other way around, right? So or that are diagraphics. So that's a big challenge for websites in languages other than English to be fully accessible with the tick, let's say that the audit says that they are fully accessible. So that's lots of work to do on the multilingualism in accessibility to be able to get there.
I will add one more thing to that. Changing attitudes is the most important thing. And when you have the top to bottom approach, it's very easy for people with disabilities to get employment. Because if the top management is sensitized and willing to recruit people with disabilities, then it's easy to make the decision. So I think most of you all are maybe in the decision-making process in your organization, just we are not asking to recruit 100% or 10%, just at least start from 1%. So down the line, in the years to come, all these mechanisms will be placed in the proper manner.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a couple of comments in regard to accessible websites, accessible platforms, and checking to make sure that they are accessible. And certainly there's much more testing happening in English language websites. And maybe this is a job opportunity for persons with disability in a number of other economies with other languages. Certainly in India, there are a number of companies that do web checking, web accessibility checking, and that could be expanded, just an idea. Also in Europe, and I know a number of companies export services to Europe, and there are more and more strict web accessibility directives coming out of Europe, going into European national countries. So that is something to also be aware of, that can mean more opportunities for persons with disability in this space. So I think that that's probably all I wanted to say. I think, did Philip have any more comments before we close?
Well, I mean, it was just the input to the last bit of it, but I think everybody else and Craig have pretty much said what I was going to say. I'll come back to a point I said at the start that Craig reiterated, is we need to stop looking at the physical being and look at the skill set. And that's my biggest frustration for many, many years, is that so many hiring decisions have been made by looking at the individual and not the skill set that they bring. And, you know, this applies to disability, it applies to whether male, female, LGBT, whatever it is. The acronym keeps growing. So, but we should, you know, we need to stop looking at that. Look at the skill sets. There's some fantastic people, you know, one of my heroes is Stephen Hawking. You know, he's not exactly was not exactly the most able-bodied person, but what an amazing physicist. And, you know, that should be some, you know, not that, you know, we should all be looking at somebody like that. You know, that's one person, there are many others, but somebody like that, take inspiration from that, see what he was able to achieve. We should be giving people like that opportunities as well, wherever we can. And, you know, it's, you know, Gunela's pointed out to me over several years that, you know, APRICOT could be doing more. I totally agree. But I want to know what we could be doing in the technical community, in the operations community, to give more opportunities for the technical training we do, for the people who come, for all the organizations that we touch. You know, I want to know because I honestly, I don't know. And, you know, and being able to improve that, I would love to help.
Do you have any closing remarks from any of the panelists? Sylvia, no? Okay, all right. So I'm just going to quickly sum up that's the session. I think we could have gone on for another hour and it still wouldn't be complete, right? Okay, so as Philip and even Sylvia has very frankly stated, we don't even know what the gap is, maybe because we aren't really doing much to find out, right? Maybe we're working in silos. There's isolated efforts. I definitely know many people who are working in the space of assistive technology, rights for persons with disabilities, but maybe we're not talking to each other as much as we should. And I myself am witness to the fact that there have been times when we have told APNIC, hey, you're not looking at the Pacific at all, how about training us? And it happened. It actually happened. We get APNIC trainings in Fiji, in the Pacific, in the AP region, where there's a requirement that there has to be a woman in the training. And there are times when I get tired of it, you know, I have to be present in every training so that my male colleagues can have a chance. Okay, so again, and then there's definitely this gap. The fact that there is the gap, you know that the gap is there, but you don't know what it consists of, right? And then there's obviously, if we look at the amendment to bills where even in the Pacific, it has definitely happened. So there are acts that specifically state that you need to start creating the provisions for inclusion. So in technological terms, it could be advocacy. It could also be the fact that we need to start introducing assistive technology, right? And then the quota for persons with disabilities as per the Employment Act, and then the identification of persons with disabilities, who are they, where are they? The preliminary MQR, minimum qualification requirement for ICT jobs versus the need for early intervention for inclusion. That's also a huge, huge challenge and a very important perspective for us to be mindful of. And then there's advocacy of rights for persons with disabilities. So all in all, our closing statement here today would be that there really is a dire need for multi-stakeholderism, and that is one of the core values of APrIGF. So with that, we would like to thank each and every one of you for choosing our session, for being part of the conversation. And it doesn't end here. Please add us on LinkedIn, get in touch, say hello, and let's see if we can stop working in silos and start working together.
Yes. One humble request for all of you all. Just a small request. From today onwards, change your attitudes from sympathy to empathy, dependence to independence, hidden to open, segregation to integration, exclusion to inclusion, to create a disabled-friendly environment with dignity and justice for all, because we are part of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our panelists and everyone who has joined us online from all over the world and in person. Please do continue the conversations. And as Philip very aptly stated, we wouldn't know so much about the universe, about quantum physics, all those dangerous algorithms that I wouldn't even dare starting to learn. We wouldn't know about all that if it wasn't for Professor Stephen Hawking, you know. I also draw my inspiration for him. So kudos to us for still being inspired, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please stay behind for the town hall session.